A blind billionaire is sitting alone on a park bench in the middle of the city when an elderly black homeless woman suddenly stops beside him and whispers, "I can help you see the truth." From that moment on, he begins to realize that the very people he trusted to guide and protect him are secretly preparing legal steps to strip him of his company and his freedom. What they don't realize is that every move they make is being watched by the one person society chose to ignore. And the decision the billionaire makes next will leave every one of them filled with regret. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is for you, and don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow I have something special for you. Marcus Wright sat alone on his usual bench, his posture still and composed in the way only someone long accustomed to darkness could manage. 4 years of blindness had taught him to listen with precision, to build the world inside his head from fragments of sound and scent rather than sight. Children's laughter reached him from somewhere to his right, light and careless. A jogger passed close enough that he could hear the rhythm of breathing, the soft slap of shoes against damp pavement. A dog barked nearby, sharp and excited, at something Marcus would never see. He hadn't seen anything in 4 years. But he could still feel the warmth of sunlight on one side of his face, the cooler shade on the other, and from that contrast alone he could imagine the space around him. The rain had stopped not long ago, leaving Herman Park heavy with moisture. The air smelled thick and earthy, wet concrete, damp grass and the faint green sharpness that always followed a Texas downpour. Margaret, his personal assistant, had guided him here 15 minutes earlier with her usual efficiency. Her hand had been firm on his elbow, professional and practiced, waiting while he found the bench by touch before informing him she needed to take a few calls. Her heels had clicked away toward the rose garden, the sound sharp at first, then swallowed by the ambient noise of the park. Marcus was 42 years old and he was learning to hate that sound. The clicking heels that came to collect him, to guide him, to manage his life because he couldn't manage it himself anymore. The chemical exposure had been sudden and catastrophic. One moment he'd been touring a production facility, checking on a new biotech process his company was developing. The next moment, alarms were blaring, and his eyes were burning like someone had poured acid directly onto them. The ventilation system had failed. Toxic fumes had filled the laboratory space. By the time they'd gotten him out and to the hospital, the damage was irreversible. 3 months of progressively dimming vision, like someone was slowly turning down the lights on his life. Then nothing, just endless, unchanging darkness. Kevin had been incredible through all of it. His best friend, his business partner, the man who'd been closer than a brother for 12 years. Kevin had taken over the daily operations of Wright Biotech without complaint. Had restructured everything so Marcus could step back without the company falling apart. Had hired Margaret to help Marcus adjust to his new reality, had promised over and over that everything would be okay. And Marcus had believed him, because what choice did he have? Kevin was the only person he could trust with everything. Or so he'd thought. "I can help you see the truth, son." The voice came from his left, close enough that Marcus startled slightly. He hadn't heard anyone approach, which meant the person had been very quiet or he'd been too lost in his own thoughts to notice. The voice was female, elderly, with a soft Texas drawl that had been worn smooth by decades of use. There was something careful in it, something that suggested the speaker had thought long and hard about these words before saying them. Marcus turned his head toward the sound, though the gesture was largely pointless now. "Excuse me, I said I can help you see the truth." The voice moved closer, and Marcus caught a faint scent of detergent and something else, the slightly musty smell of clothes that had been worn too long without washing. "About what's happening to you. About what's being done to you." Marcus felt his jaw tighten with familiar frustration. This happened sometimes. Well-meaning strangers who saw a blind man and felt compelled to save him, usually through prayer or some miracle cure they'd read about on the internet. He'd learned to be polite but firm in shutting these conversations down. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm fine. Thank you." "No, you're not fine at all." The woman's voice was gentle but carried an unexpected steel underneath. "That woman who brings you here every Sunday, Margaret, I've heard you call her, she's planning something terrible, her and your friend Kevin. They're planning to take everything from you." Marcus went very still, The ambient sounds of the park seemed to fade away, leaving only the pounding of his own heartbeat in his ears. The woman continued quickly, as if she'd been rehearsing this speech and needed to get it all out before she lost her nerve. My name is Dorothy Mitchell. I'm 68 years old. I sleep in a storage room behind the laundromat on Fannin Street when the owner lets me, and I collect bottles and cans when he doesn't. For the past 7 months I've been in this park every Sunday afternoon. I've watched you and Margaret come here. I've seen her walk away to make her phone calls, and I've heard what she says when she thinks nobody's listening. You've been watching me, Marcus said slowly, not sure whether to be concerned or angry. I've been watching her, Dorothy corrected. There's a difference and it matters. See, when you're homeless and old like me, people stop seeing you. You become invisible. They look right through you like you're not even there. Margaret, she doesn't notice the old woman digging through the recycling bins. She thinks she's alone when she makes those calls. Marcus's hands gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles going white with tension. What calls? What are you talking about? Last Sunday, Dorothy said, her voice dropping lower. She was standing right over there by those camellia bushes. Must have been about 20 feet from where I was sorting through the bins. She was on her phone talking to someone named Douglas. I heard her say clear as day, Douglas, the plan is working perfectly. Once the board declares him incompetent next month, we'll have everything. He trusts Kevin completely. He doesn't suspect a thing. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Marcus felt dizzy, disoriented in a way that had nothing to do with his blindness. Kevin, she'd said Kevin's name. Kevin, who'd been his best friend since their sophomore year at Rice University. Kevin, who'd stood beside him at his parents' funeral 8 years ago when a drunk driver had taken them both in one horrible instant. Kevin, who'd never wavered, never complained, never shown anything but absolute loyalty through 12 years of building a company together. I know you don't believe me, Dorothy said, her voice taking on a tone that was part sympathy, part determination. Why would you? I'm just some crazy homeless woman telling you stories. But son, I've seen this exact thing happen before. My son Thomas, he had a business partner too. Best friend since college, just like you and Kevin. That man stole everything from Thomas. Made it look like Thomas was the one embezzling. Set him up so perfectly that my boy ended up in prison for something he didn't do. Her voice cracked slightly, and Marcus heard genuine pain in it. Thomas has been in Huntsville for 6 years now. 6 years for a crime his best friend committed and blamed on him. I saw the warning signs back then, little things that didn't add up, questions I should have asked, but I stayed quiet. Told myself I was being paranoid, that I shouldn't question my son's friendships. That silence cost Thomas everything. His company, his marriage, his freedom. His daughter was 10 years old when he went to prison. She's 16 now, and barely remembers him. Dorothy paused, and Marcus heard her take a shaky breath. I won't stay quiet again. I can't. When I heard Margaret talking about destroying you the same way David destroyed my Thomas, I knew I had to warn you. Even if you think I'm crazy, even if you don't believe me, I had to try. Marcus heard Margaret's voice in the distance, calling out to someone. She'd be heading back this way soon. She's coming, Dorothy said urgently. I'll be here next Sunday, same time, if you want to know more about what I've heard and seen. I've been writing it all down, every conversation, every date, every word I can remember. But Mr. Wright, please don't tell them about me. Don't tell Margaret or Kevin that I talked to you. I've got so little left in this world. I can't afford to lose what safety I have. Wait, Marcus started to say, but he heard shuffling footsteps moving away quickly, surprisingly fast for an elderly woman. By the time Margaret's heels clicked up to the bench, Dorothy was gone. Ready to go? Margaret asked, her voice carrying that professional warmth Marcus had always appreciated, had thought was genuine. Yes, Marcus managed to say, his voice sounding strange and distant to his own ears. Ready. As Margaret guided him back to the car, her hand firm on his elbow, steering him around puddles he couldn't see, Marcus's mind was spinning. Everything Dorothy had said played on repeat in his thoughts. The specific details. The mention of Kevin by name. The talk of a board meeting next month where they'd declare him incompetent. And the story about her son, Thomas, destroyed by his best friend. sitting in prison for 6 years because he'd trusted the wrong person. But Marcus couldn't just accept this at face value. What if Dorothy was mentally ill? What if the stress of homelessness had created paranoid delusions? What if she'd overheard fragments of conversation and constructed an elaborate conspiracy that didn't exist? What if he was about to destroy a 12-year friendship based on the confused warnings of a stranger? Marcus had always prided himself on being a good judge of character, on surrounding himself with loyal people, on building relationships based on trust and mutual respect. Kevin had been the foundation of that worldview. If Kevin could betray him, if Kevin had been planning to betray him all along, then Marcus didn't know anything at all. But why would an elderly homeless woman lie about something so specific? What could she possibly gain? The questions churned through his mind all the way home, through dinner, through the evening. Long after Margaret had left for the night, and Marcus was alone in his penthouse 60 floors above Houston, he sat in the darkness of his bedroom, a darkness that never changed whether his eyes were open or closed, and tried to make sense of what Dorothy had told him. He thought about the past 4 years, how gradually Kevin had taken over more and more of the company, how Marcus's involvement had shrunk from daily operations to weekly briefings to monthly updates. How his world had contracted to this penthouse, the park on Sundays, occasional board meetings where he mostly listened while Kevin presented reports. How dependent he'd become, how isolated, how controllable. Around 2 in the morning, he made a decision. He activated his phone's voice assistant and said, "Search for Thomas Mitchell, Houston, fraud conviction." The assistant read the results to him in its neutral electronic voice. Thomas Mitchell, 35, owner of Mitchell Logistics, convicted in 2016 of embezzling nearly $800,000 from his own company. His business partner David Jones had discovered the theft and reported it to authorities. Mitchell received an 8-year sentence and was currently incarcerated at the Huntsville unit. The article noted that Mitchell maintained his innocence, claiming his partner had framed him. But the evidence had been overwhelming: forged signatures, fake accounts, all in Mitchell's name. Marcus sat back, his hands shaking slightly. Dorothy's story was real. Her son was actually in prison. That didn't necessarily mean everything else she'd said was true, but it meant she wasn't just making things up out of thin air. He thought about Kevin, about the past 4 years since the blindness, how Kevin had gradually taken over more and more of the company's operations. How Kevin had insisted Marcus step back, focus on adjusting to his new limitations, let Kevin handle the business side of things. How isolated Marcus had become, with no visitors except Kevin, no involvement in the company except what Kevin chose to tell him. But what if this was all paranoia? What if he was letting fear and isolation cloud his judgment? What if investigating Kevin would destroy not just their friendship but the company they'd built together? Marcus picked up his phone again. He scrolled through his contacts, looking for a name he hadn't called in almost 15 years. James Brown, no relation to David Jones, he hoped. James had been his roommate freshman year at Rice, before Marcus had met Kevin. They'd been close friends but had lost touch after James moved to Dallas to start some kind of private investigation business. Marcus had kept the contact information, updating it periodically through mutual acquaintances, but had never had a reason to call. Until now, his finger hovered over the call button. This was the moment. Once he made this call, once he set an investigation in motion, there was no going back. Either he'd discover Kevin was innocent and damage their friendship irreparably, or he'd discover Kevin was guilty and lose the person he trusted most in the world. Both options were terrifying. But Dorothy's voice echoed in his mind. "I stayed quiet once and it cost my son everything." Marcus pressed the call button. The phone rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Hello, James? This is Marcus Wright." There was a pause, then the voice became more alert. "Marcus, holy hell man, do you know what time it is? 3 in the morning. I know, I'm sorry. But James, I need help. And I need you to keep this completely confidential. I can't tell anyone I called you, especially not Kevin Brandt." Another pause, longer this time. When James spoke again, his voice had changed completely, taking on a professional tone that Marcus vaguely remembered from their college days when James was working on difficult problems. "What's going on, Marcus? I think my best friend and my personal assistant are planning to have me declared incompetent so they can steal my company. I think they've been planning it for years. And I think they studied a previous case where this exact thing worked before, a case involving someone named David Jones who framed his business partner. The line was silent for several seconds. Then James said, "That's a serious accusation. What makes you think this?" For the next hour, Marcus told him everything. The chemical exposure and the blindness. The isolation and dependence. Kevin's gradual takeover of the company. Margaret's appearance and her management of Marcus's entire life. And finally what Dorothy Mitchell had told him in the park. When he finished, James was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Okay. First thing, you absolutely cannot let Kevin or Margaret know that anything has changed. You have to act completely normal, like you suspect nothing. Can you do that?" "I think so. You have to know so, Marcus. If they realize you're onto them, they might accelerate their plans or destroy evidence. Second thing, I'm driving down to Houston today. I need to verify this Dorothy woman's story. If what she told you is accurate, if her son's case is real and similar to what you're describing, then we have a starting point. But I need to talk to her directly, see her documentation if she has any. She said she'd be at the park next Sunday. I'm not waiting until Sunday. You said she gets breakfast at St. Martin's Community Center on Claiborne Street. That's what she mentioned, yes. Then that's where I'll start. Marcus, listen to me carefully. If what you're suggesting is true, if Kevin has been planning this for years, he's smart and methodical and dangerous. People who execute this kind of long-term betrayal don't just give up when they're discovered. We need to be very, very careful. I understand. Do you? Because I need you to really think about what you're saying here. Kevin Brandt has been your best friend for 12 years. You trust him more than anyone. If you're wrong about this, if Dorothy is mistaken or lying or mentally ill, you could destroy a friendship and damage your company based on the paranoid delusions of a homeless woman you've never met before. Marcus had already thought about this, had spent hours weighing the possibilities. I know, but James, what if I'm right? What if Kevin has been planning to steal everything, and I'm just sitting here blind and helpless while he does it? What if Dorothy risked everything to warn me and I ignored her because I was too afraid to question my friend? I'd rather investigate quietly and be wrong than stay ignorant and lose everything. Okay, James said. Then we investigate, carefully and quietly. I'll call you after I talk to Dorothy. In the meantime, Marcus, act normal. Don't change anything about your routine. Don't ask Kevin or Margaret any unusual questions. Just be the blind dependent CEO they expect you to be. After hanging up, Marcus sat in his bedroom for a long time, listening to the ambient sounds of the building. The hum of the air conditioning. The distant traffic from the street far below. The complete absence of any other human presence in his life. He'd built an empire worth billions of dollars. He'd revolutionized biotech manufacturing. He'd employed thousands of people and changed the trajectory of multiple industries. And now he was sitting alone in the dark, dependent on a stranger's warning about his best friend's betrayal, hoping that another stranger he hadn't seen in 15 years would be able to help him. The mighty brought low. Marcus almost laughed, but it came out more like a sob. James Brown pulled into the parking lot of St. Martin's Community Center at 6:45 Thursday morning, 15 minutes before the breakfast program started. The building was a squat brick structure that had probably been built in the 60s, showing its age but maintaining a certain dignity through obvious care and regular maintenance. A hand-painted sign near the door announced the breakfast hours and welcomed everyone, no questions asked. He'd spent the previous evening researching everything he could find about Thomas Mitchell's case. The details matched what Marcus had relayed from Dorothy's story. Mitchell had indeed been convicted of embezzling from his own company, Mitchell Logistics. The evidence against him had been substantial: bank records, forged signatures, email trails, all pointing to a systematic theft of nearly $800,000 over 18 months. His business partner, David Jones, had discovered the fraud during a routine audit and had immediately contacted authorities. David had cooperated fully with the investigation, providing documentation and testimony that had been crucial to the conviction. Thomas Mitchell had maintained his innocence throughout, claiming David had set him up, but the jury hadn't believed him. 8 years in Huntsville. What was interesting though, was what James had found when he dug deeper. David Jones had sold Mitchell Logistics 6 months after Thomas's conviction, pocketing $6 million. He'd moved to an expensive community in the Woodlands and seemed to be living very comfortably. Meanwhile, Dorothy Mitchell, Thomas's mother, had lost her apartment and ended up homeless about 6 years ago, according to public records James had managed to access. The timeline suggested she'd spent everything she had trying to help her son, and when the money ran out, she'd ended up on the streets. That kind of detail wasn't something you'd make up for a con, it was too easy to verify, too likely to fall apart under scrutiny. Which meant Dorothy was probably telling the truth, at least about her own circumstances. Whether she was telling the truth about what she'd overheard in the park, that remained to be seen. James walked into the community center just as volunteers were setting up for breakfast. The main room was large and utilitarian, with long tables and folding chairs arranged in neat rows. The smell of coffee and scrambled eggs filled the air. A handful of people were already waiting near the door, most of them elderly, all of them wearing that particular combination of dignity and exhaustion that comes from chronic homelessness. James scanned the room and spotted her almost immediately. She was sitting alone at a table in the corner, a worn canvas bag beside her chair and a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses perched on her nose. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite her circumstances, there was something orderly about her appearance. She was studying a piece of paper with intense concentration, her lips moving slightly as she read. James approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. Dorothy Mitchell, she looked up, and her eyes, sharp and clear behind the glasses, assessed him with surprising quickness. "Who's asking?" "My name is James Brown, I'm a private investigator and an old friend of Marcus Wright, he asked me to find you." James pulled out his identification and held it where she could see it clearly. Dorothy studied the ID carefully, taking her time, before she finally set down her paper and removed her glasses. "How is he?" "Scared. Grateful to you for warning him, and wanting to know if what you told him is true." James gestured to the empty chair across from her. "May I sit?" She nodded, and James settled into the metal folding chair. Up close he could see the fine lines etched deeply into her face, the weathering that came from too much sun and not enough shelter, but her eyes were alert, intelligent, missing nothing. "I need to verify some things you told Marcus," James said, keeping his voice low and respectful. "About your son Thomas. About what happened to him. About what you've been hearing in the park." "You think I'm lying," Dorothy said. It wasn't a question, just a flat statement of fact. "I think Marcus is about to make some very important decisions based on what you told him. I need to make sure the information is accurate, that you're who you say you are, and that your story is real." Dorothy reached into her canvas bag with the careful movements of someone who'd organized everything precisely. She pulled out a battered manila folder and set it on the table between them. "I learned a long time ago that nobody believes you unless you have proof. Especially when you're old and homeless and female." She opened the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, neatly folded and arranged chronologically. Court documents, printouts from library computers, letters written on prison stationery. Everything protected in plastic sleeves that looked like they'd been scavenged from an office supply store's dumpster. Houston Chronicle, September 18, 2016, Dorothy said, sliding the first clipping across the table. "Thomas Mitchell arrested for embezzlement and fraud." James read the article carefully. The details matched everything he'd researched the night before: the arrest, the charges, the shocked reactions from employees who'd thought Thomas was an honest, hard-working boss. Dorothy slid another clipping across. "Thomas Mitchell sentenced to 8 years. That was March 2017. His lawyer said if he went to trial, he'd get 15 years. Said the evidence was overwhelming. My son took the deal because he was scared, not because he was guilty." More documents followed. Letters from Thomas maintaining his innocence, describing how David had gradually taken over more of the financial operations, how Thomas had trusted him completely. Visitor logs from Huntsville showing Dorothy's regular trips, every single month for 6 years, never missing once. Research she'd done at the library about similar fraud cases, notes written in careful handwriting on scraps of paper. I have excellent eyesight for someone my age, Dorothy said, noticing James's surprised expression at the neat handwriting. My mother lived to 94 and never needed glasses stronger than these. I got her eyes, only good thing she left me, but I'm grateful for them. Can't do much when you're homeless, but I can read and write just fine. She pulled out a receipt. I do part-time work at the library on Sundays and Thursdays, shelving books, organizing donations. They let me use their computers and printer in exchange. That's where I got these plastic sleeves, this folder. Mrs. Martinez knows my situation. Leaves supplies out for me sometimes. That explained the organization, James thought. Dorothy had access to resources most homeless people didn't. This is impressive, James said honestly. You've documented everything. I learned from Thomas's case, Dorothy said, her voice hardening slightly. He didn't keep good records, didn't document the things that seemed off about David's behavior, didn't save emails or ask for explanations when numbers didn't make sense. He just trusted. And that trust destroyed him. She pulled out a small notebook, pages torn from church bulletins and napkins from this very community center, all covered in the same careful handwriting. When I started watching Marcus and Margaret in the park, when I first heard her making those phone calls, I knew I needed to write everything down. Every date, every time, every word I could remember. Because if I was going to warn someone, I needed proof. Otherwise, I'm just a crazy old woman telling stories. She flipped open the notebook. I write it all down immediately after I hear it. Don't trust my memory. I'm 68, homeless, not sleeping well, not eating well, so I keep a pen and paper in my pocket always. The moment Margaret walks away from her calls, I write down what I heard. Date, time, location, exact words as close as I can get them. James flipped through the notebook. Dorothy had recorded dozens of snippets of conversation, all attributed to Margaret's phone calls in the park. March 12, 2:15 p.m. Ms. Douglas confirmed the board meeting is scheduled for June 20th. We need Marcus completely dependent by then. No questions, no resistance. March 19, 2:30 p.m. Ms. Kevin's ready. Once Marcus steps down, the transfer happens within 48 hours. Everything moves to the offshore accounts Douglas set up. April 2, 2:20 p.m. Ms. The isolation is working perfectly. Marcus hasn't spoken to anyone outside our circle in months. He trusts Kevin completely. April 9, 2:25 p.m. Ms. Douglas says we can move approximately $20 million immediately after conservatorship is established. The rest follows within 6 months. April 16, 2:18. He doesn't question anything anymore. This is going exactly as we planned 2 years ago. April 23, 2:12 p.m. Ms. Kevin will present the cognitive decline documentation at the board meeting. Dr. Hamilton's psychiatric evaluation says Marcus can't manage his own affairs. April 30, 2:25 p.m. Ms. Once we have conservatorship, Marcus gets a comfortable trust fund. We're not monsters, he'll be taken care of. But the company and the real money become ours. Page after page of careful documentation. Times, dates, locations, verbatim quotes as close as Dorothy could remember them. Tell me about Kevin Brandt and Margaret, James said. You told Marcus you saw them together. Dorothy flipped to a page near the back of her notebook. May 7th. That was the first time I saw them meet, though I suspect it wasn't their first meeting. After Margaret left Marcus at the park, I followed her to the parking lot. Man was waiting by a black Mercedes, tall, brown hair, expensive suit. They talked for about 5 minutes. He handed her an envelope. She handed him something I couldn't see, looked like papers in a folder. When they said goodbye, he kissed her on the cheek. Wasn't a business kiss. Too familiar, too intimate. You get a license plate. Dorothy recited it from memory. James wrote it down, already planning to run it through the DMV database. I went to the library after that. Dorothy continued. Used their computers to look up images of Kevin Brandt from Wright Biotech's website. Matched the man I'd seen, started paying more attention after that. They've met 4 more times that I know of. Same parking lot, same kind of exchange. Last time was May 21st. James sat back, processing all of this. Dorothy, why tell Marcus? Why get involved at all? You have nothing to gain from this and potentially a lot to lose if Margaret and Kevin find out you've been watching them. Dorothy was quiet for a moment, her weathered hands folded on the table in front of her. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried an undercurrent of old pain. I stayed quiet once before, Mr. Martinez. When Thomas first started his business with David, I saw things that bothered me. David buying expensive things on a salary that shouldn't have supported them. Taking trips Thomas said the company couldn't afford. Making decisions without consulting Thomas. She paused. I should have said something. Should have asked questions. But I didn't want to be the meddling mother, didn't want to question my son's friendships, so I stayed quiet. And that silence cost Thomas everything. Her voice strengthened. When I heard Margaret talking about destroying Marcus the same way David destroyed Thomas, I couldn't stay quiet again. Maybe Marcus won't believe me. Maybe he'll think I'm crazy, but at least I'll have tried. At least this time, I'll have spoken up before it's too late. James studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or instability. All he saw was determination and the kind of hard-earned wisdom that comes from surviving terrible losses. Dorothy, I'm going to need you to come with me. We need to get you somewhere safe and document all of this formally. If what you're telling me is true, if Marcus decides to act on this information, you'll be a crucial witness. Margaret and Kevin will want to discredit you or worse. Dorothy's hands tightened slightly on the table. I can't afford, Marcus is paying for it. Protective housing, security, everything you need, you're helping him save his company and possibly his freedom. The least he can do is make sure you're safe and comfortable. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked back. I don't want charity, Mr. Martinez. It's not charity, you're a witness in a potential criminal case. Witness protection is standard procedure. And Dorothy, James leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. When was the last time you slept in a real bed, had a hot shower, felt safe? She didn't answer, but her expression told him everything he needed to know. Let us help you, James said. You warned Marcus, now let him help you. 3 hours later, James sat with Marcus in a private conference room at Elena Callahan's law office. Elena specialized in corporate fraud, conservatorship abuse, and financial crimes. James had worked with her on several cases over the years and trusted her completely. Dorothy sat across from them, looking small and overwhelmed in the professional setting. Elena had the contents of Dorothy's folder spread across the table, studying each document with the intense focus of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. Marcus sat very still, his hands folded on the table in front of him, his sightless eyes pointed in Dorothy's general direction. Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Thank you for warning me. I can't tell you what it means. Call me Dorothy, please. And you don't need to thank me, I'm just doing what I should have done years ago for my own son. Elena looked up from the documents. Dorothy, I'm going to record our conversation if that's all right with you. I need you to walk me through everything you've seen and heard regarding Marcus Wright, Kevin Brandt, and Margaret Sullivan. Take your time. Be as detailed as you can remember. For the next 3 hours, Dorothy recounted everything. The phone calls she'd overheard, the meetings between Margaret and Kevin, the specific conversations about board meetings and offshore accounts and conservatorship. She spoke slowly and carefully, referring to her notebook frequently to make sure she got the dates and times right. Elena asked clarifying questions, probing for details, testing Dorothy's memory and consistency. But Dorothy's story never wavered. The dates matched, the details aligned, everything held together under scrutiny. When Dorothy finally finished, Elena sat back with an expression that James knew meant she was convinced. This is solid evidence of conspiracy, Elena said. Combined with financial records we can subpoena, this could build a strong case for fraud and attempted conservatorship abuse. But Marcus, we need to move carefully. If Kevin and Margaret suspect we're investigating, they might accelerate their timeline or destroy evidence. What do you recommend? Marcus asked. We need someone inside Wright Biotech who can quietly examine the company's finances. Someone who has access to the accounting systems but isn't aligned with Kevin. Someone we can trust to document any irregularities without tipping off Kevin or Margaret. Marcus thought for a moment. Christopher Davis. He's a junior financial analyst, 23 years old. I hired him about 4 years ago, right before I lost my sight. He seemed smart, ethical, asked good questions during the interview. He reports to Kevin now, but I remember being impressed with his integrity. Can we trust him? James asked. I think so, but if we approach him and he tells Kevin, we're finished. Then we need to be very careful about how we make contact, Elena said. James, can you arrange to meet with him? Somewhere private, away from the office. I'll set it up. Elena turned to Dorothy. You'll need secure housing immediately. If Margaret or Kevin learn that you've been talking to us, you could be in danger. I have a location we use for witnesses, safe, comfortable, completely confidential. You'll stay there until this is resolved. How long will that be? Dorothy asked quietly. Could be weeks, could be months. Legal proceedings move slowly, especially when you're dealing with this level of fraud. But Dorothy, I need you to understand something. Once we move forward with this, once we present evidence to the board, and potentially to law enforcement, your life will change. You'll be a public witness in a major corporate fraud case. Are you prepared for that? Dorothy looked at Marcus, at his sightless eyes, at the tension in his shoulders. Then she looked at her own weathered hands, at the folder containing 6 years of documentation about her son's false imprisonment. I'm prepared, she said firmly. I stayed quiet once, and it cost my son everything. I won't stay quiet again. Elena nodded. All right then. James, get Dorothy settled in protective housing. Marcus, you need to go home and act completely normal. Don't change anything about your routine with Margaret. Don't ask Kevin any unusual questions. Just be the blind, dependent CEO they expect you to be. How long do I have to keep pretending? Until we have enough evidence to move decisively. We need to verify Dorothy's information through financial records, get surveillance if a judge approves it. Build an airtight case. Could be 3 weeks, could be 6 weeks. Can you maintain the deception that long? Marcus thought about Kevin. About 12 years of friendship, of trust, of working side by side to build something meaningful. About the man who'd stood beside him through his parents' deaths, through the blindness, through everything. The man who was planning to steal everything and leave Marcus helpless and institutionalized. But what if Dorothy was wrong? What if there was an innocent explanation for the conversations she'd heard? What if he was about to destroy a friendship based on misunderstood fragments of phone calls? Marcus, Elena said gently, reading the doubt on his face, we're not accusing Kevin yet, we're investigating. If we're wrong, if there's an innocent explanation, Kevin never has to know we looked into this. But if we're right, and you do nothing, you lose everything. I can do it, Marcus said quietly. Whatever it takes. James met Christopher Davis 3 days later at a coffee shop in Montrose, far enough from Wright Biotech's offices that there was minimal chance of running into anyone from the company. Christopher arrived exactly on time, dressed professionally despite it being a Saturday, his expression wary but curious. He was young, 23, as Marcus had said, with an earnest quality that James remembered from his own early 20s, before the world had shown him how complicated everything could be. Christopher ordered a black coffee and sat down across from James with his back straight and his hands folded on the table, clearly nervous, but trying not to show it. Mr. Martinez, thank you for meeting with me. Your message said you're working for Marcus, right? That's right. I'm a private investigator, and I've been asked to look into some concerns regarding Wright Biotech's finances. Christopher's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. What kind of concerns? Before I get into that, I need to know, can you keep this conversation completely confidential? Not tell anyone at the company, including Kevin Brandt, that we met. That depends on what you're asking me to do. Fair answer. James appreciated the caution. I'm asking you to tell me if you've noticed any financial irregularities in the company's accounts. Unauthorized transfers, suspicious vendors, anything that doesn't add up properly. Christopher's face went very still, very carefully neutral. When he spoke, his voice was measured. Why are you asking me this? Because Marcus has reason to believe Kevin Brandt has been embezzling from the company. We need to know if there's evidence to support that suspicion. Several seconds of silence passed. Christopher stared at his coffee cup, then looked up to meet James's eyes directly. If I answer that question honestly, I could lose my job. I have student loans, rent, car payments. I'm supporting my mother back in Dallas. I can't afford to be unemployed. If you answer that question honestly, you could help stop a major fraud. and Marcus will make sure you're protected, that you don't suffer professionally for doing the right thing." More silence. James could see Christopher wrestling with the decision, weighing risks and ethics and self-preservation. Finally, Christopher spoke very quietly. "Yes, I've noticed irregularities, significant ones." James leaned forward. "Tell me." Christopher pulled out his phone and opened a notes application. "I've been documenting this for about 7 months now. Started last November, when I noticed some unusual patterns in our vendor payments. Companies I'd never heard of receiving large payments for consulting services that didn't seem to match any projects I knew about." He turned the phone so James could see. "Over the past 2.5 years, I've tracked approximately $22 million in transfers to companies that I can't verify are legitimate. They have websites and business addresses, but when you dig deeper, there's no substance. No employees listed, no published work, no real business operations. Just corporate shells designed to look legitimate." James felt his pulse quicken. $22 million, Kevin had been stealing on a massive scale. "Are these transfers still happening?" "Yes, weekly, sometimes twice per week. All authorized by Kevin Brandt using his CFO credentials. The amounts have been increasing, started at maybe $50,000 per transfer 2 years ago, now they're up to $200,000 or more. Does Kevin know you've noticed?" "I don't think so. I'm careful. I process the transactions like I'm supposed to. I don't ask questions. I don't slow anything down. I'm just a junior analyst. I'm not supposed to question the CFO's decisions. But Mr. Martinez, I know something's wrong. I've known for months. I just didn't know what to do about it, or who to tell." "Why didn't you report it to Kevin directly?" "Because he's the one authorizing the transfers. If he's involved in fraud, reporting to him accomplishes nothing except getting me fired or worse. If he's not involved, if there's some legitimate explanation I don't understand, then I'm the paranoid junior analyst accusing the CFO of theft. Either way, my career is over." James nodded slowly. "Christopher, I'm going to be direct with you. We believe Kevin has been planning for several years to have Marcus declared mentally incompetent so Kevin can take complete control of the company. The embezzlement is part of that plan. Eventually, Kevin will likely try to blame the missing money on Marcus's supposed cognitive decline. Frame Marcus the same way business partners have been framed in similar cases." Christopher's eyes widened. "That's why Mr. Wright hasn't been at the office. Kevin's been keeping him away, isolated." "Exactly. Will you help us? Will you provide your documentation to prove the fraud is ongoing?" Christopher was quiet for a long moment, staring at his phone screen with its damning evidence. "If I do this, I become a whistleblower. Companies don't like whistleblowers. I could be blacklisted in the industry, or you could be the person who stopped a massive fraud and helped save a man from being institutionalized based on lies. Marcus will protect you. If you face retaliation, we'll sue for wrongful termination. And when this is over, you'll have a job at Wright Biotech for as long as you want it, with better pay and more responsibility. You can promise that, Marcus can promise that, but I need you to meet with him first. Hear it directly from him what he's asking, and what he's offering in return." Christopher nodded slowly. "Okay, yes, I want to meet him. Want to hear him tell me this is what he really wants. Can you come to his penthouse tonight, around 7? Margaret, his assistant, will be gone by then. I'll be there." As they stood to leave, Christopher hesitated. "Mr. Martinez, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did Marcus find out? How did he discover what Kevin was doing, if he's been isolated for 4 years?" James smiled slightly. "An elderly homeless woman warned him. Someone nobody else was paying attention to." Christopher's expression showed surprise, then something like understanding. "The people we don't see." "Exactly. The people we don't see sometimes see everything." That evening, Christopher Davis sat in Marcus Wright's study, looking around at the carefully organized space with obvious interest. Everything was labeled in Braille, positioned precisely, clearly designed for someone who navigated by touch and memory rather than sight. Books were arranged by height and subject. File folders were color-coded with raised dots marking their contents. Even the coffee cups in the small kitchenette, attached to the study had different textures, so Marcus could identify them by feel. It was the workspace of someone who'd lost one sense and had systematically adapted everything else to compensate. Marcus stood when Christopher entered, extending his hand in greeting. He was a few inches off target at first, but Christopher moved slightly to meet the gesture, and they shook hands firmly. "Mr. Davis, thank you for coming. I'm Marcus Wright, though I suppose you know that already. Call me Christopher, please. And sir, it's an honor to meet you. I've always admired your work in biotech manufacturing. Call me Marcus, have a seat." Marcus gestured toward the chairs, his hand finding the arm of his own chair to orient himself before sitting down. "James tells me you've been documenting financial irregularities at the company." "Yes, sir, for about 7 months now." "Why didn't you report them to Kevin directly?" "Because Kevin's the one authorizing the transfers, sir. If he's involved, reporting to him would accomplish nothing. If he's not involved, I'm accusing the CFO of theft based on suspicions I can't fully prove. Either way, I lose my job." Marcus nodded slowly. "Smart thinking. You were in an impossible position, but Christopher, I'm going to tell you something that's going to be difficult to hear, and I need you to listen carefully and decide whether you believe me." "Okay." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on the desk. "Kevin Brandt has been my best friend for 12 years. We met in college, built this company together, stood beside each other through every success and failure. When I went blind 4 years ago, Kevin stepped up, took over operations, hired help for me, promised everything would be fine. I trusted him completely. He was closer to me than a brother." He paused. "But Kevin has been stealing from the company. $22 million that you know about, possibly more. He's been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, so he can take full control through conservatorship. He and my assistant Margaret are working together with a lawyer named Douglas Kern, who specializes in helping people execute this kind of fraud." Christopher sat very still, processing this. "We're going to stop him," Marcus continued, "but we need evidence that the theft is ongoing, that it's systematic and deliberate. Your documentation provides that evidence. But Christopher, if you help us, you become a whistleblower. Kevin will try to destroy your reputation. He might claim you're the one who stole the money. He'll use expensive lawyers and PR firms to paint you as a disgruntled employee making false accusations. Are you willing to risk that?" Christopher was quiet for several long moments. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "My father died when I was 8 years old. Heart attack. He worked in construction, didn't have good insurance. My mother raised me and my sister alone, working 3 jobs to keep us fed and in school. She taught us that character matters more than comfort, that doing the right thing is its own reward, even when it costs you something." He looked directly at Marcus. "If I stay quiet, if I let this fraud continue because I'm scared of losing my job, what does that say about who I am? What does that say about the values my mother worked so hard to teach me?" Marcus's expression softened slightly. "It would say you're human. Self-preservation is natural, Christopher. Nobody would blame you for protecting yourself. Maybe. But I'd blame myself. Sir Marcus, I'll help. I'll provide every piece of documentation I have. I'll testify if needed. I'll do whatever it takes to stop Kevin. But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If I get blacklisted for this, if no company will hire a whistleblower, I need to know you'll help me rebuild my career. I'm not asking for charity, I'm asking for a fair chance. A job based on my skills and integrity, not on connections or pity." Marcus stood and extended his hand again. This time he found Christopher's immediately, as if he'd been calibrating his spatial awareness during the conversation. "You have my word. More than that, when this is over you'll have a job at Wright Biotech with better pay and more responsibility. We need people like you, Christopher. People who do the right thing even when it's hard. That's the kind of person I want helping run this company." Christopher shook his hand firmly. "Then I'm in. Let's stop Kevin Brandt." Later that night, after Christopher had left, Marcus sat alone in his study with James. "You think we can trust him?" Marcus asked. "I think he's exactly who he appears to be. Smart, ethical, scared but brave. Yeah, we can trust him."
That makes 5 of us now. You, me, Dorothy, Elena and Christopher. 5 people against Kevin and Margaret and whoever else they have on their side. Quality over quantity, James said. Kevin has resources but we have the truth. That counts for something.
Marcus was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about what Dorothy said, about her son trusting his business partner completely, about how that trust destroyed him. You're worried you're making the same mistake, trusting Kevin when you shouldn't have. I'm worried I've already made it, that I've been blind in more ways than one. Marcus's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. 12 years, James. 12 years I've known Kevin. How do I not see this coming? How do I not notice that my best friend is planning to destroy me? Because that's how betrayal works, Marcus. The people who can hurt us most are the ones we trust completely. If you'd suspected Kevin, if you'd been watching for warning signs, you would have seen them. But you weren't watching because you had no reason to watch. That's not stupidity. That's just what friendship looks like. Some friendship. Yeah, some friendship. James paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know Kevin meant a lot to you. Kevin doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did. The man I thought was my friend, that was just a mask Kevin wore while he set everything up. I've been mourning someone who was never real. That doesn't make it hurt less. No, Marcus agreed quietly. It doesn't. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the betrayal settling over both of them. Finally James spoke. Elena wants to move forward within the next 4 to 6 weeks. We document everything Christopher finds, we petition for court-approved surveillance on Kevin and Margaret, and then we present everything to the board and the authorities simultaneously. Doesn't give Kevin time to react or destroy evidence. 4 to 6 weeks. I have to pretend everything's normal for another month or more. Can you do it? Marcus thought about Margaret arriving tomorrow morning with her cheerful efficiency and her hidden plans. About Kevin calling to check in, his voice full of false concern and real calculation. About sitting through meetings and conversations knowing that every word was part of an elaborate lie. I can do it, he said. Whatever it takes. Good, because Marcus, this is going to get harder before it gets better. When Kevin realizes what's happening, when he understands we're coming after him, he's going to fight back with everything he has. Are you prepared for that? Marcus remembered something Dorothy had said during their meeting. About how she'd stayed quiet once and it had cost her son everything. About how she'd chosen to speak up this time no matter the cost. If a 68-year-old homeless woman could find that kind of courage, Marcus could find it too. I'm prepared, he said firmly. Let's take back my company. The next 6 weeks were among the longest of Marcus's life. Every morning, Margaret arrived at his penthouse at precisely 7:30 with her customary efficiency. She'd make coffee while Marcus was still getting ready, organizing his morning pills in the labeled compartments of his medication organizer, pulling out his clothes for the day, and laying them on the bed in the order he'd need to put them on. Her voice was always pleasant, always professional, always laced with that undertone of concern that Marcus had once thought was genuine care. Now it just sounded like manipulation. You seem tense lately, Margaret observed one morning as she poured his coffee. Is everything all right? Marcus kept his expression neutral, his voice unconcerned. Just thinking about Kevin's suggestion, about officially stepping down as CEO at the board meeting next month. It's a big decision, but it makes sense, doesn't it? Margaret's voice carried that gentle reasonableness that made disagreement seem unreasonable. Kevin's been running things already. This would just formalize what's already happening. Make the structure clear for everyone. I suppose so, Marcus. She sat down across from him. He could hear the chair scraping slightly on the floor, could smell her perfume as she leaned closer. I know change is hard, especially after everything you've been through. But Kevin really does care about you. He wants what's best for you and for the company. You know that, right? The lie came out so smoothly, so convincingly packaged in concern and affection. If Marcus hadn't known better, he would have believed her completely. Hell, he had believed her completely for 4 years. I know, Marcus said, forcing himself to sound grateful. I'm lucky to have Kevin, and you. I don't know what I'd do without both of you. You'll never have to find out, Margaret said warmly. We're here for you. Always. After she left for her afternoon errands, those mysterious appointments that Marcus now knew were probably meetings with Kevin or their lawyer Douglas Kern, Marcus sat alone in his study, hands trembling with suppressed rage. His phone buzzed with a text from James' court-approved surveillance 2 weeks ago. "We've got recordings. You need to hear this." Marcus navigated to the encrypted email account Elena had set up for their communications. James had sent an audio file with a brief note. "This is from Kevin's office yesterday. Brace yourself." Marcus put in his headphones and pressed play. The audio quality was decent professional surveillance equipment, captured from Kevin's office at Wright Biotech. Kevin's voice came through clearly. "The board meeting is in 2 weeks. Marcus will agree to step down voluntarily. He's too confused and isolated to fight back. Once I'm officially CEO, we file for conservatorship within 30 days. The medical documentation Douglas arranged through Dr. Hamilton shows progressive cognitive issues consistent with depression and isolation. Marcus won't even understand what's happening until it's over." Another voice: "Margaret, what about the money? When do we move it offshore?" Kevin: "After the conservatorship is established. Once I have legal control of Marcus's assets through the conservatorship order, we transfer everything to the accounts Douglas set up in the Caymans. Marcus keeps a comfortable trust fund, enough that he won't be homeless or anything. We're not monsters. But we take our share, roughly 25 million total by the time we're done, and I keep the controlling stake in a company worth billions. By the time anyone figures it out, the money will be untraceable and I'll have legally obtained voting control." Margaret laughed, a sound that made Marcus's stomach turn. "I almost feel bad for him. He trusts you so completely." Kevin's response carried a tone Marcus had never heard before. Not quite cruel but deeply cynical. "That's always been Marcus's weakness, Margaret. He believes in loyalty, friendship, all that sentimental stuff. I used to think it was admirable back in college. We were going to change the world together, build something meaningful, all that naive bullshit you believe when you're 20. A pause, then Kevin continued. "But somewhere along the way I realized Marcus was getting all the credit while I did half the work. Every article, every interview, Marcus Wright, visionary founder. I was just and his CFO Kevin Brandt, the genius and his handler, the star and the support staff." His voice hardened. "The blindness just made it easier to finally take what I've earned. I've spent 12 years building this company while Marcus got the glory. He can keep his legacy. I'll take the money and the control. That seems like a fair trade to me." Margaret: "And what about after? Once we have everything?" Kevin: "You and I split the 25 million. Douglas gets his fee. Marcus gets his trust fund and a comfortable care facility somewhere quiet. Clean, simple, done. Everyone gets what they deserve." Marcus stopped the recording. His hands were shaking, his breath coming in short gasps. It wasn't just the theft. It wasn't just the planned conservatorship. It was Kevin's voice, casual, almost bored, discussing 12 years of friendship as nothing more than a business arrangement that had finally outlived its usefulness. Reducing their partnership to the star and the support staff, and the resentment, the bitterness, the sense that Kevin felt owed this betrayal, that Marcus had somehow wronged him by being the more visible founder. His phone rang. "James, you listened to it," James said. It wasn't a question. "I listened." "Marcus, I'm sorry. I know this is don't." Marcus's voice came out harsher than he'd intended. "Just tell me what happens next." Elena's already sent the recordings to the district attorney's office. Combined with Christopher's financial documentation and Dorothy's testimony, we have overwhelming evidence. The DA is preparing to file charges. They want to coordinate the arrests with the board meeting. Let Kevin walk in expecting to take over, then arrest him there. Maximum impact, prevents him from destroying evidence. When? June 20th. The board meeting Kevin's been planning for, except instead of Marcus stepping down, Kevin gets arrested. The DA, Elena, Dorothy, Christopher, they'll all be there. You present the evidence to the board, they vote to remove Kevin and restore you to full authority, and law enforcement takes him into custody immediately. 2 more weeks, Marcus said quietly. "I can do 2 more weeks, you're sure? Because if Kevin suspects anything, if you slip up even once, I won't slip up. I've played blind and helpless for 4 years, I can play it for 2 more weeks." But that evening Kevin called. His voice carried an edge Marcus had never heard before, something sharp and worried underneath the usual friendly tone. Marcus, something strange happened today. One of our junior analysts, Christopher Davis, didn't show up for work. Hasn't called in, hasn't responded to messages. His mother says she hasn't heard from him either. You remember Christopher? Marcus's heart rate spiked, but he kept his voice confused. Christopher, the young man I hired a few years ago. Yeah, smart kid, worked in financial analysis. Thing is, Marcus, he was one of the few people with access to our full transaction database. And right around when he disappeared, I noticed someone had been running unusual queries on our vendor payment systems, looking at companies, payment histories, that kind of thing. Kevin paused, and Marcus could practically hear him thinking. Marcus, has anyone contacted you recently? Anyone asking questions about the company, about me, about our finances? No, just you and Margaret. Kevin, you're worrying me. What's going on? I don't know, but I'm going to postpone the board meeting. Something doesn't feel right. Panic flared in Marcus's chest. If Kevin postponed the meeting, he'd have time to cover his tracks, destroy evidence, maybe even accelerate the theft and disappear. They needed Kevin to walk into that board meeting confident and unprepared. Kevin, no, don't postpone it because of me. If Christopher's missing, that's a police matter, not a board matter. And honestly, I'm ready to make the transition. You've been running things anyway, let's just make it official. I'm tired of pretending I'm still capable of being CEO. Marcus forced his voice to sound small, defeated, exactly what Kevin would expect from someone too broken to fight back. You were right, I need to step back completely. Let you handle everything. I trust you, Kevin. I always have. There was a long pause. Marcus could almost hear Kevin's suspicions warring with his ego, his caution fighting against his desire to finally claim what he thought he'd earned. You're sure? Kevin said finally. Because Marcus, if you have any doubts, we can wait. I don't want you to feel rushed into anything. I'm sure. Let's do this. June 20th, like you planned. After Kevin hung up, Marcus immediately called James. Christopher's missing, he said without preamble. Kevin knows someone was looking at the financial records. He almost postponed the board meeting, but I talked him out of it. Where's Christopher? Is he safe? He's fine. We moved him to protective custody 3 days ago, same place as Dorothy. Kevin must have noticed the database queries Christopher ran last week when he was pulling everything together for Elena. Don't worry, Christopher's secure, and Kevin can't get to him. Kevin's suspicious. What if he doesn't show up to the meeting? He'll show up, James said with certainty. His ego won't let him stay away. He thinks he's won, thinks he's about to take over a billion-dollar company. Men like Kevin don't run when they think they're about to collect their prize. They show up and collect. I hope you're right. I am. But Marcus, be extra careful these next 2 weeks. Kevin's on edge. Don't do anything that makes him more suspicious. I won't. But Marcus sat in his darkened study for a long time after hanging up, wondering if he'd just made a terrible mistake. What if he'd convinced Kevin too well? What if Kevin decided to accelerate his plans, file for conservatorship before the board meeting, move the money immediately? What if Marcus had just given Kevin exactly the encouragement he needed to finish destroying him? The next 2 weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every interaction with Margaret felt like walking through a minefield. Every phone call with Kevin carried an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. But Marcus played his role perfectly. The blind, defeated CEO ready to give up. The man too broken by disability and isolation to fight back. The friend who trusted Kevin completely. And every day he listened to the recordings James sent him. Kevin and Margaret planning the conservatorship. Kevin explaining to Douglas Kern how he'd isolated Marcus. Margaret laughing about how easy Marcus was to manipulate. The recordings hardened something in Marcus's chest, burned away the last lingering doubts, the last hopes that maybe there was some innocent explanation for everything. By the time June 20th arrived, Marcus felt nothing but cold determination. It was time to take back his life. The morning of June 20th dawned clear and bright, Houston's summer heat already building by 8 a.m. Marcus dressed carefully in one of his best suits, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, chosen by Margaret months ago. He wanted to look like the CEO he was, not the helpless invalid Kevin had tried to make him. Margaret arrived at 7:30 as always,
but there was something different in her voice, an edge of excitement poorly concealed beneath her usual professionalism. "Big day," she said, as she poured his coffee. "How are you feeling?" "Ready," Marcus said. "Ready to move forward." "That's good. That's really good. Kevin will be so pleased." She paused. "Marcus, I just want you to know, what you're doing today takes courage. Recognizing your limitations, stepping back gracefully, that's not weakness, that's wisdom." The manipulation was so smooth, so perfectly calibrated to make Marcus feel good about giving up everything. If he hadn't known the truth, he would have believed her completely. "Thank you, Margaret, for everything you've done. I couldn't have managed these past 4 years without you, and you won't have to manage alone going forward. We'll make sure you're comfortable, that you have everything you need. You're going to be fine, Marcus, better than fine, in whatever care facility you've chosen." Marcus thought, comfortable and docile and completely under your control, but he just smiled and nodded. The drive to Wright Biotech's headquarters took 20 minutes. Margaret guided him through the building, narrating the route like she always did, her hand firm on his elbow. Employees greeted them. Marcus recognized voices, heard the genuine affection from people who'd worked for him for years, people who had no idea what was about to happen. They entered the executive elevator. Margaret pressed the button for the top floor, where the boardroom was located. "Everyone's already here," Margaret said. "Kevin's excited to see you. The whole board is looking forward to." She stopped abruptly. The elevator doors had opened, and Marcus could tell from Margaret's sudden silence that something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked. There are a lot of people here, more than expected." Her voice had lost its smooth confidence. "Marcus, who are all these people?" Marcus stepped out of the elevator, and James was immediately at his side, taking his elbow from Margaret's suddenly slack grip. "Good morning, Margaret," James said pleasantly. "Marcus doesn't need your help anymore. You can go on into the boardroom. Kevin's waiting for you." "Who are you? What's going on?" "I'm James Brown, private investigator. And what's going on is that you and Kevin Brandt are about to be arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and attempted conservatorship abuse. So please go ahead into the boardroom. Don't keep Kevin waiting." Marcus heard Margaret's sharp intake of breath, heard her shoes backing away, heard the panic in her voice as she said, "I don't know what you think you know, but we have recordings." "Margaret," Elena Callahan's voice cut in smoothly. "Every conversation you had with Kevin and Douglas Kern, every plan you made, every lie you told, it's over." Footsteps, Margaret running toward the boardroom, her heels clicking frantically on the polished floor, then shouting from inside as she burst through the doors. "We need to go now." Margaret's voice carried back through the open doors. "Kevin, something's wrong. We need to leave right now." Kevin's voice confused. "What are you talking about?" Margaret calmed down. Then Marcus was walking into the boardroom, James guiding him but letting Marcus lead. He heard the assembled crowd, the 12 board members Patricia Hernandez had told him about, plus the district attorney and his team, plus Dorothy and Christopher waiting to testify, and Kevin. Marcus could hear his former friend's breathing change, could practically feel Kevin's sudden understanding that everything had fallen apart. "Marcus," Kevin's voice held a note Marcus had never heard before. "Fear. What's going on?" "Good morning, Kevin," Marcus said quietly. He let James guide him to the head of the table, the CEO's chair, his chair. "Thank you all for coming. I know this isn't the board meeting you were expecting." Patricia Hernandez spoke up. "Marcus, you said this was urgent. What's this about?" Marcus took a breath. This was it, the moment everything changed. 4 years ago I lost my sight in a chemical accident at one of our facilities. I was vulnerable, scared, dependent. I trusted Kevin Brandt, my best friend, my business partner, the man I'd known for 12 years to help me manage the company and my life while I adjusted. His voice strengthened. That trust was a mistake. For the past 2.5 years Kevin has been systematically embezzling from Wright Biotech. He's stolen approximately $22 million through fraudulent vendor payments. He's been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent through a conservatorship proceeding, so he can take complete control of the company and my personal assets. He and my assistant Margaret Sullivan have been working with an attorney named Douglas Kern, who specializes in this exact kind of fraud. The boardroom erupted. Kevin's voice rose above the chaos. That's insane. Marcus, what are you talking about? I would never. We have recordings. Marcus said flatly. Your voice, Kevin, discussing the conservatorship plan, discussing how you've isolated me, discussing how you're going to take what you've earned and leave me with a trust fund in a care facility somewhere. He nodded to Elena, who began playing the surveillance recordings. Kevin's voice filled the boardroom, casual and calculating as he discussed betraying his best friend. Marcus listened to Kevin's recorded words echo through the room, and he watched in his mind through the sounds as everything Kevin had built collapsed around him. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. That's not, you can't. Kevin's voice was strangled, desperate. That's taken out of context. Marcus, please, you have to listen to me. Mr. Brent, the district attorney's voice cut through Kevin's pleading. Kevin Brent, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and attempted conservatorship abuse. You have the right to remain silent. Marcus heard the handcuffs clicking into place, heard Kevin still protesting, still claiming misunderstanding, still trying to talk his way out of what 12 years of friendship couldn't protect him from. Heard Margaret being arrested as well, her voice high and panicked as she tried to claim she hadn't known, hadn't understood, had been manipulated by Kevin. The recordings proved otherwise. When the police had escorted Kevin and Margaret out, when the chaos had settled into shocked silence, Patricia Hernandez spoke. Marcus, we all owe you an apology. We should have noticed, should have questioned Kevin's management more closely, should have done more oversight. You trusted him, Marcus said quietly, like I did, like we all did. That's not failure. That's just being human. Christopher stood then, his young voice steady despite obvious nervousness. If I may, I'd like to show the board the financial evidence I've compiled. The $22 million Mr. Brent stole, I can trace every transaction, show every fraudulent vendor, demonstrate exactly how he did it. For the next hour, Christopher walked the board through the embezzlement. Dorothy testified about what she'd heard and seen. Elena presented the legal framework of Kevin's planned conservatorship fraud. James detailed the investigation and the evidence they'd gathered. By the time they finished, every board member looked shaken. Patricia called for a vote, all in favor of removing Kevin Brent from all company positions and restoring Marcus' right to full authority as CEO with complete operational control. 12 hands rose, unanimous, motion carries. Marcus, welcome back. As the board members filed out, several stopped to apologize to Marcus, to express their shock and horror, to promise better oversight going forward. Marcus accepted their words graciously, but inside he felt hollow. He'd won. Kevin was arrested, the company was his again, but the friend he'd believed in for 12 years was gone, had never existed in the first place. After everyone else had left, Marcus stood with his small team, James, Elena, Dorothy, and Christopher, in the boardroom that had once been his second home. Thank you, he said quietly. All of you, you saved my life. You saved yourself, Dorothy said firmly. By listening, by believing, by having the courage to fight back. We saved each other, Marcus corrected. That's how it works. That's how it should work. James cleared his throat. So what now? You've got your company back. Kevin's going to prison. What's next? Marcus thought about Dorothy, who'd spent 6 years visiting her son in prison, who'd lost everything trying to help him. He thought about Christopher, who'd risked his career to do the right thing. He thought about all the people like them, people who spoke up, who did the right thing, who helped others even when it cost them. Now, Marcus said slowly, we make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. We build something that helps people like Dorothy, like Thomas, like everyone who faces this kind of betrayal. We turn Kevin's attempted destruction into something meaningful.
A foundation? Elena asked. A foundation, Marcus confirmed. We'll call it the Kevin Brent Memorial Foundation for Truth and Justice, named after the man who betrayed me, so everyone remembers that our worst moments can become our greatest purpose. Dorothy's hand found his and squeezed gently. He tried to make you helpless, instead he gave you purpose. Yes, Marcus said, that's exactly right. The trial began 14 months later, after extensive investigation and evidence gathering by the district attorney's office. The courthouse was packed every day. Media spectators, right, biotech employees, people drawn by the sensational nature of the case. Blind CEO betrayed by best friend. Homeless woman's warning that saved a billionaire. Junior analyst risking everything to expose fraud. The story had everything. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Christopher Davis testified about the $22 million in theft, walking the jury through each fraudulent transaction with the careful precision that had made him an effective witness. He showed the shell companies, the fake invoices, the systematic looting of company funds over 2.5 years. Dorothy Mitchell testified about the phone conversations she'd overheard, her careful documentation and clear memory making her a surprisingly credible witness despite Kevin's lawyers' attempts to discredit her as confused or unreliable. Her notebook with its meticulous dates and times and quotes proved impossible to dismiss. The surveillance recordings were played in court. Kevin and Margaret's own voices casually discussing stealing everything from Marcus, planning his conservatorship, discussing their resentments and calculations. Financial forensics experts traced every dollar of the stolen money, showing exactly where it had gone and how Kevin had hidden it. They demonstrated that the thefts had accelerated over time, starting small and growing bolder as Kevin felt more confident he wouldn't be caught. Investigators revealed Kevin's gambling debts going back years, not massive but significant enough to provide clear motive. Card games in private clubs, online poker, sports betting. Nothing that would ruin him on its own, but enough to create pressure to make $22 million look very attractive. Douglas Kern, the attorney who'd helped orchestrate the scheme, had already taken a plea deal and testified against Kevin and Margaret. He described in detail how he'd helped them plan the conservatorship fraud, how he'd connected them with Dr. Hamilton, also arrested, who'd been prepared to provide false psychiatric evaluations of Marcus's supposed cognitive decline. Kern's testimony revealed the pattern. He'd helped execute similar frauds 3 other times over the past decade. Thomas Mitchell's case was just one example. There were others, other business partners framed and destroyed while the guilty parties walked away wealthy. Kevin's defense tried to argue that Marcus had fabricated the entire thing, that his blindness had made him paranoid and jealous of Kevin's success running the company. They tried to paint Dorothy as mentally unstable, Christopher as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, James as a friend with a grudge helping Marcus destroy Kevin. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings were Kevin's own voice. The money trail was clear, the testimony was consistent and corroborated by multiple independent sources. Margaret's lawyers tried a different approach, claiming Kevin had manipulated her, that she'd thought everything was legitimate, that she was a victim of his deception rather than a co-conspirator. But the recording showed otherwise. She'd been enthusiastic, calculating, fully aware of what they were doing. Her laughter as she discussed manipulating Marcus proved impossible to explain away. The jury deliberated for 9 hours over 2 days. Guilty on all counts. Kevin Brandt was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted conservatorship abuse. Margaret Sullivan received 15 years. Douglas Kern, tried separately for his role in orchestrating multiple frauds over the years, received 22 years. Dr. Hamilton, who'd been prepared to provide false psychiatric evaluations, received 10 years and lost his medical license permanently. Marcus sat in the courtroom as the sentences were read, James beside him describing Kevin's reaction. "He looks shocked," James murmured. Like he genuinely didn't believe this would happen to him. Like he thought even now somehow he'd talk his way out of it. Marcus felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a deep, bone-tired sadness for the friendship that had never been real and the trust that had been weaponized against him. After the sentencing, Dorothy reached over and squeezed his hand. "Justice. Justice," Marcus echoed, but it felt hollow. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Elena had prepared a statement, but Marcus waved her off. He wanted to say this himself. "Kevin Brandt was my best friend for 12 years, Marcus said, his sightless eyes directed at where James had positioned him to face the cameras. "I trusted him with everything, my business, my life, my future. When I went blind I depended on him completely, and he used that trust, that dependence, as a weapon to steal from me." He paused. But Kevin made a mistake. He thought the people he'd dismissed as unimportant, Dorothy Mitchell, homeless and elderly, Christopher Davis, young and junior, James Brown, a friend from years ago, he thought they didn't matter, that they couldn't stop him. Marcus's voice strengthened. He was wrong. Dorothy's courage in speaking up saved me. Christopher's integrity in documenting the truth exposed him. James's loyalty in believing me gave me the support I needed to fight back. The people Kevin thought were powerless proved to be the strongest of all. A reporter called out, "Mr. Wright, how does it feel knowing your best friend betrayed you?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "It feels like mourning someone who died, except they never existed in the first place. The friend I thought I had, that person was never real. I've been grieving a ghost." "What will you do now?" "Rebuild the company, yes, but more importantly, I'm going to help make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Dorothy's son is still in prison for a crime he didn't commit, framed by his business partner using the same attorney Kevin used. We're going to help free him. And we're going to start a foundation to support people like Dorothy, like Christopher, like everyone who speaks truth even when it's dangerous." Another reporter, "What will you name the foundation?" Marcus smiled slightly grimly. "The Kevin Brandt Memorial Foundation for Truth and Justice. Named after the man who betrayed me. Because I want everyone to remember that betrayal can transform us if we let it. That our worst moments can become our greatest purpose." 3 months after the trial ended, Marcus stood before another judge, this one hearing arguments about Thomas Mitchell's conviction. Elena presented the evidence with the same meticulous care she'd used in Kevin's trial. Douglas Kern's pattern of helping people frame their business partners, established through his plea deal testimony. The similarities between Thomas's case and Marcus's case, best friends since college, complete financial control, forged documents creating false evidence. Forensic analysis showing that much of the evidence used to convict Thomas had been digitally manipulated in ways that wouldn't have been obvious years ago but were clear with modern analysis techniques. David Jones, subpoenaed to testify, took the Fifth Amendment on every question. His silence was damning. The judge reviewed everything carefully, took a week to consider all the evidence and precedents, then called everyone back to deliver his ruling. Thomas Mitchell's conviction is hereby vacated. The evidence presented shows clearly that Mr. Mitchell was the victim of an elaborate fraud perpetrated by David Jones with the assistance of attorney Douglas Kern. Mr. Mitchell is innocent of all charges and is ordered released immediately. The state will issue a formal apology and begin restitution proceedings for the time wrongfully served. In the courtroom, Dorothy collapsed into sobs. Marcus sat beside her, unable to see her tears but feeling them in the way she gripped his hand, in the trembling of her shoulders as she cried. 6 years, she kept saying. 6 years he's been in there for nothing. He's coming home now, Marcus said gently. It's over, Dorothy. He's free. 4 weeks later, Thomas Mitchell walked out of Huntsville prison into the bright Texas sunlight. He was 41 years old, his dark hair streaked with gray, his face marked by the lines of 6 years of wrongful imprisonment. He'd been 35 when he went in, young, successful, full of hope. He came out middle-aged, cautious, carrying the wariness of someone who'd learned the hard way not to trust. Dorothy ran to him the moment he appeared, moving faster than Marcus would have thought possible for a 68-year-old woman. Thomas dropped his small bag of possessions and caught her, and they stood there holding each other, both of them crying, while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions neither of them heard. Marcus stayed back, giving them space. This moment belonged to them. But after several minutes, Thomas approached him, his voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Wright, my mother told me everything you did, how you believed her when nobody else would, how you fought for her, how you helped prove I was innocent. Your mother saved my life," Marcus said simply. "She warned me about Kevin when she had every reason to stay quiet. Helping you was the least I could do, the only right thing to do." Thomas pulled him into a tight hug. "She's been homeless for 6 years because of me, because she spent everything trying to help me. And you gave her back her dignity, her home, her hope. I don't have words for what that means. She gave me the same things," Marcus said. "We helped each other. That's what people should do." A teenage girl approached tentatively, Sarah, Thomas's daughter, now 16. She'd been 10 when her father went to prison, young enough that 6 years was more than a third of her entire life. She looked like Dorothy, with the same sharp eyes and determined chin. "Dad?" she said softly, her voice breaking. Thomas turned to his daughter and broke down completely, pulling her close and sobbing into her hair. Sarah cried with him, years of loss and grief pouring out all at once. Marcus walked away to give the family privacy. James caught up with him at the edge of the parking lot. "That was good work," James said quietly. "Thomas is free, Dorothy has her son back. You kept your promise. It's not enough to make up for 6 years stolen, but it's something. It's more than something. It's justice. Real justice, not just revenge. Marcus nodded slowly. Kevin taught me what betrayal looks like. Dorothy taught me what courage looks like. I'd rather spend my energy honoring her than mourning him. They stood together in silence for a moment, watching Thomas reunite with his daughter, watching Dorothy's joy at having her son back. What's next? James asked. We build the foundation. We help other people like Thomas. We make sure that when someone like Dorothy has the courage to speak up, there are people ready to listen and help. We change the system so this happens less often. That's ambitious. Dorothy was homeless with nothing, and she changed my life. If she could do that, I can be ambitious about making sure her courage wasn't wasted. 6 months after Thomas's release, Marcus stood in a conference room with a small group of people who'd become family in ways Kevin had never been. Dorothy now living in a comfortable apartment, provided by the foundation they were building, looking healthier and happier than she had in years. Thomas working with them to develop programs for the wrongfully convicted, bringing his lived experience to every decision. Christopher, promoted to Chief Financial Officer of Wright Biotech at age 24, the youngest CFO of any major biotech company. He was implementing comprehensive fraud prevention systems and teaching other companies how to protect themselves. James, lead investigator for the foundation, using his skills to help expose other corporate betrayals. Elena, legal counsel, fighting conservatorship abuse cases across the state. And Sarah, Thomas's daughter, interning with them while finishing high school, already planning to study criminal justice in college. The Kevin Brandt Memorial Foundation for Truth and Justice is officially incorporated, Elena announced, signing the final paperwork with a flourish. We're real, we're funded, we're ready to start helping people. Dorothy spoke up, her voice carrying the quiet authority she'd developed over the past months. I want to make sure we do this right, that we don't just help people, we empower them. We listen to them. We treat them like the experts on their own lives, not like victims who need saving. Agreed, Marcus said. Dorothy, you're co-director with me for a reason. Your voice, your experience, your wisdom, that's what makes this foundation meaningful. Not my money, Thomas added. And we need to remember that most people who get caught in these situations don't have a billionaire to help them fight back. We need systems that work for everyone, not just the wealthy. That's exactly right, Elena said, which is why we're going to lobby for better whistleblower protections, stronger oversight of conservatorships, clearer fraud detection requirements for companies. We're not just helping individuals, we're changing the system. Christopher nodded enthusiastically. I'm developing a financial integrity curriculum that companies can implement. Transparent oversight, multiple approval requirements, regular audits by independent firms. Make it harder for someone like Kevin to steal for years without detection. Marcus listened to them planning, strategizing, building something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. This was what mattered. Not the company worth billions, not the money. This people working together to protect others from the kind of destruction he and Thomas and Dorothy had experienced. To the foundation, James said, raising a glass of champagne. To truth and justice, Dorothy added. To second chances, Thomas said. To doing the right thing, even when it's hard, Christopher finished. They drank together, this unlikely family, bound by courage and betrayal, and the choice to build something good from something terrible. Later that evening, Marcus stood with Dorothy on the balcony of the foundation's temporary office space, feeling the warm Houston evening air on his face. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything, for warning me, for being brave when you had every reason to be afraid. Thank you for listening, Dorothy replied, for believing a homeless old woman when you could have dismissed me as crazy. You saved my life, Dorothy, and you saved mine. Gave me purpose when I thought I was done. Gave me back my son, gave me a reason to keep going. She paused. We saved each other, Marcus. That's what people do when they choose to care. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Do you think about Kevin? Dorothy asked. About what he did, every day. Probably will for the rest of my life, but not with anger anymore. Just sadness. Grief for something that was never real. That's healthy. Grief is good. It means you cared, even if the other person didn't. Did you grieve for David, the man who destroyed Thomas? Dorothy considered this. I grieved for who I thought David was, for the young man who played with my grandson, who I fed Sunday dinners. That person never existed, but I grieved him anyway, and then I got angry.
Used that anger to fuel 6 years of fighting for Thomas. Now the anger's gone too, just determination left. Determination to make sure it doesn't happen to others. That's what I want too. To transform the grief and anger into something useful. Then we're doing the right thing. Marcus heard voices from inside the office. Thomas and Sarah laughing about something. Christopher and James debating some technical point about financial oversight. Elena on the phone negotiating something. This is what family sounds like, Marcus said. Real family. Not the fake friendship Kevin pretended. This is what trust actually feels like. Yes, Dorothy agreed. This is what matters. This is what lasts. 3 years after Dorothy first approached Marcus in Herman Park, the foundation had helped over 300 people. But numbers didn't capture the real impact. There was Richard Watson, a 72-year-old man whose daughter had tried to declare him incompetent to steal his retirement savings. The foundation provided legal representation, and Richard was now living independently, rebuilding his relationship with his other children. There was Maria Santos, who'd been fired after reporting sexual harassment and financial irregularities at her company. The foundation helped her sue for wrongful termination, and she'd won a settlement large enough to start her own business. She now employed 12 people and donated 10% of her profits to the foundation. There was James Morrison, no relation to their James, who'd served 9 years for a fraud his business partner had committed. The foundation helped overturn his conviction using techniques developed from Thomas's case, and he now worked with Thomas developing programs for the wrongfully convicted. Story after story of people pulled back from the edge, given second chances, empowered to rebuild their lives. Marcus had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Wright Biotech, appointing new leadership while he focused on the foundation. Christopher, as CFO, had implemented such comprehensive fraud prevention and ethical oversight that Wright Biotech became the industry standard for corporate transparency. Thomas had rebuilt his life completely. He'd started a small consulting firm helping businesses establish better financial controls. He donated 20% of his profits to the foundation, and spoke regularly at conferences about wrongful conviction and the need for justice reform. His relationship with Sarah, fractured by 6 years of imprisonment, had healed stronger than before. Sarah was now 19, studying criminal justice at the University of Houston, already planning to become a prosecutor specializing in wrongful convictions. She interned at the foundation every summer, learning from Elena how to build cases that actually delivered justice. Dorothy, at 71, had become the heart of the foundation. She spoke at events, trained volunteers, and most importantly met with the people they were helping. She had a gift for making people feel seen, for validating their experiences, for showing them that surviving terrible things didn't mean there was something wrong with them. You're not broken, she'd tell them. You're not weak. You were betrayed by people you trusted, and that's on them, not you. Your ability to trust was beautiful. Their decision to exploit it was evil. Don't let their evil take away your ability to trust good people. One afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Wright, my name is Lisa Lopez. I'm David Jones's daughter. Marcus went very still. David Jones, the man who'd framed Thomas, who'd destroyed Dorothy's family, who'd worked with Douglas Kern to perfect the methods Kevin had later used. I know who my father is, Lisa said quickly, her words tumbling out in a rush. I know what he did. I cut contact with him 7 years ago when I finally understood the truth about Thomas Mitchell. I've been working as a corporate fraud investigator since then, trying to, I don't know, make up for what my father did somehow. Atone for his crimes, even though they're not mine. She took a breath. I heard about the foundation, about what you're doing. And I wanted you to know, my father had other victims. At least 3 other business partners he framed over the years, always with Douglas Kern's help. I have documentation. Names, cases, evidence. People who are still in prison or who lost everything and never recovered. Marcus leaned forward. You're saying there are more people like Thomas out there right now? At least 3 that I know about, maybe more. Mr. Wright, I want to help. I want to help free them the way you freed Thomas Mitchell. I want to do something right with the knowledge I have about how my father operated. I want to choose differently than he did. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Dorothy would believe you. She'd say everyone deserves a chance to choose their own path, regardless of where they came from. Will you work with me? Lisa asked. I know people will question my motives. My father's victims might not want to work with his daughter, but I have to try. I can't change what my father did, but maybe I can help undo some of the damage. We'll work with you, Marcus said. But Lisa, you need to understand this won't be easy. People will be suspicious. They'll wonder if you're trying to help your father somehow, or if you have ulterior motives. You'll need to be patient and prove yourself over time. I understand, I'm prepared for that. I've been living with the shame of my father's crimes for 7 years. I can handle suspicion if it means helping innocent people. Over the next 18 months, Lisa's documentation helped overturn 2 more wrongful convictions. 2 more people like Thomas walked free, after years of imprisonment for crimes they hadn't committed. The foundation grew and evolved. They expanded their mission to include helping children of people who'd committed fraud or betrayal, people like Lisa who wanted to build different legacies than their parents had left them. Marcus saw Dorothy's wisdom reflected in this expansion. Everyone carried potential for both light and darkness. People weren't defined by where they came from, but by what they chose to do with the opportunities they had.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.